We interview clergy. You almost have to take a part of the interview time just to do a little counseling.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up. Then we're going to take you back all the way to 2020 as we speak with Scott Thumma and Tracy Simmons, who have just released a new study titled Exploring the Pandemic's Impact on Congregations. It's a really interesting conversations as we hear some of the first data coming out of the pandemic as a result of pandemic's influence and impact upon congregational life. It's a good pod, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well, I'm kind of having some flashbacks today.
Are you now?
Yeah, yeah.
What are you flashing back to?
To COVID.
Oh, that's not a good flashback.
Well, that would be on you.
That is my fault. I
That would be on
apologize.
you, yes. Which, today we talked to Scott Thumma and Tracy Simmons about a study they've been conducting, exploring the pandemic impact on congregations. And it's kind of one of the, I don't know if as far as my radar, early long-term studies that has been conducted over
Right.
the impact of COVID. I mean, here we are 5.5 years
Mhm.
after. And so it just put me back kind of in that place of thinking about that moment in time, things that happened that you thought would never change. You know, our world
Right.
changed overnight
Mhm.
and you thought it'll never go back to this other way of doing things.
Right.
And I don't know. It just got me thinking.
Yeah, ever since March, we've kind of been reminiscing about 2020 and that volatile time that we all went through as a global community. We talked a little bit about it on the actual anniversary date when everything shut down. But in the meantime, we've come across some of these articles and now this study by the Harvard Institute of Religion talking about, what getting some real data coming out of the pandemic 5 years ago and what's happened since then, especially within faith and congregation. Tracy reached out to me a couple of months ago, was writing an article for her news source, and we talk about it in the interview. But that really kind of started me thinking about or reflecting more about the pandemic and the results of the pandemic. So I think it's still affecting us today and will continue to affect us years and years from now.
I think I agree, but I think there are some ways we talk about this a little bit in the interview about how, churches are, famously resistant to change.
What? Hang on.
And so, I know,
Breaking news.
breaking
Breaking
news.
news.
But yeah, so we talked about how, of course, and that's, we don't need a data point to tell us
Right. Sure.
that churches, businesses, I mean, everybody was forced to change so quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's so interesting about studying this particular, institution and
Mhm.
how did that play out now 5.5 years later. So it got me to thinking about things that we changed overnight. We personally, and then as a society, that you thought you would never go back to doing
Right.
something any other way. And the only thing I can liken it to is like the pain of childbirth, which I know you don't
Oh, I
understand.
can so relate to this
Yeah,
right now.
And you think, oh my goodness, I'll never forget this. And then,
Mhm.
over time it does kind of lessen. Your reaction and response
Yeah.
to it is a little bit different to those memories. And
Mhm.
COVID's a little bit the same way. But I was just thinking, what were some things I thought would stick for
Mhm.
us that didn't?
Okay.
And so for me, like one thing, I thought I would never again get on an airplane without a mask.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. I remember you and I talked about it
Yeah.
because we do fly quite a bit. And
Right.
you had a conversation with a flight attendant one time and she said, oh yeah, masks are here to stay.
Right. Yeah. I do remember that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I forgot about
And
that.
what happens now? Like,
Yeah.
no,
We've shed the mask.
we've
But
shed it.
you
Like,
see somebody with a
sneeze all
mask.
over me, whatever.
But you see somebody with a mask, you go, mad respect for
Right,
you.
right. You're dedicated.
That's
I
right.
also thought I would never again be without like antibacterial solution
Mhm.
and wipes.
Mhm.
And now I could couldn't even tell you where any. I threw a ton of it away.
So we had
when we
so
moved.
much
Yeah.
bacon. Yeah.
I mean, I don't like it. It makes my hands sticky. I don't care for it anyways. I know some people, were big believers and carried that stuff everywhere before the pandemic and have continued. Not me. I just, yeah, I'm not a fan. Give me all the bacteria. I thought I would never touch a hotel remote again. And now, I mean, it's fine. I'll lick it. I don't care. No, I don't. Teasing.
Gross. So gross.
I don't know.
They still are gross, though.
Oh, no, they're totally gross. I think about it. It crosses my mind. And then I'm like,
whatever.
Whatever. I've had my shots. But when I was in a hotel room when kind of the world started to shut down in Atlanta, and I remember that was kind of like the first notice from the hotels of we've sanitized everything or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember not wanting to touch the remote, and so my solution was to unwrap the little coffee cups, that they put there with the plastic wrap. So I unwrapped the little cup and I used that wrapping and put it over the remote. So basically it was a remote condom. I was very proud of my ingenuity there.
Very impressive. Very impressive. You should have marketed that back then.
Yeah. I also thought I would never again go inside a grocery store or go inside a restaurant to order food. And for the most part, I've kind of stuck to that.
The grocery store, you've pretty much ceased all human interaction.
Why walk inside when you can order it on an app, right?
That's right.
Why have human interaction if you don't have to? So so those are some things.
And if you ever find a restaurant that would bring the margarita to the car.
Oh, there are some. It's fine. There are some. I think we all thought we would never be without a stash of toilet paper again.
Oh, yes.
And I don't know if you remember
that
this,
was terrifying.
but we ended up so lucky because during that time when COVID hit, I was on an Amazon subscribe and save, and somehow it had gotten doubled up for the few months prior. And so we had mass just back stock of toilet paper because I kept forgetting to cancel one of the subscribe and save deliveries.
Right.
So I just had closetfuls of toilet paper. And so when the world shut down and everybody was freaking out about toilet paper, I'm like, shh, don't you tell anybody. Don't you tell anybody. We got through the entirety of the toilet paper shortage.
We did.
Fine.
Yeah.
So,
And we did, and we're not a big milk family, so we didn't drink a lot of milk, so we didn't have to worry about that.
No, but we kind of panicked about some of the other shortages as well. But that was one thing we actually didn't have to panic about. I also never thought I'd put on a bra again. But
and here you are.
And here I am. Yeah, have done that. So anything like that for you that you thought you would do or would not do?
Yeah, not necessarily things that didn't stick that I thought would stick, but a couple of things that did stick that I really did not anticipate were these. And the first one is this. You'll remember early on, because we had run through the vault of reruns and new shows that were coming out on Netflix and Hulu and all the streaming services. We'd watched
the entire
everything.
Cable network backlog streaming. We had watched everything.
Everything, absolutely. And so I had this just deep yearning to watch something live. And so what did I start watching?
Baseball.
I started watching baseball. Now, I loved baseball, grew up playing baseball, played college baseball. But after my career playing it,
you were over it.
I was done. I just checked out. And for some reason during the pandemic, I picked it back up. And guess what? I still watch.
Yeah, you're still watching. You're really enjoying
it. Yeah. So that kind of stuck. That was a result of the pandemic. And I still remember those first few baseball games. I was watching hockey too at the time, and they came back and played the Stanley Cup, but they had to play it all in Canada in 2 locations. But especially those baseball games where they were playing to empty stadiums, it was so crazy. And they would actually out in the outfield, they would cut out images of people.
I remember that.
A home run ball would hit a cardboard image, and they would just collapse, or their head would pop off, and then they would fill crowd noise into the speaker system just to give the players some, idea that, they're doing well and some encouragement. So,
yeah, I think that the thing I've been thinking about today after our conversation was, just the moment we realized we are not invincible and we are vulnerable. And I think as Americans, we do have that problem of thinking that nothing can touch us and we are invincible, and we are learning in more ways than that in the last several years that we are in fact vulnerable and that we can't take things for granted. And that's one of the things that I'm a little bit sad about, granted, I don't want to live in that moment of COVID, that fear and terror and tragedy that struck, but I wish we could keep a little bit of that humility that comes with knowing that we do need to be accountable to each other. We need to be accountable to nature and to the earth around us, because, what we do or what happens around us does affect everyone.
Yeah.
And so those are some things I wish we had kept a little more in the forefront of our mind.
And that's a great segue into the final thing that I kept during COVID. Uh, and that is really a reconnection with just nature around me.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll remember at our old house during COVID, I created the bird sanctuary in the
Yes,
backyard.
yes, you did. They sadly did not have a backstock of toilet
They did
paper.
not.
No, they did not.
They
So,
did not.
yes.
But I would go out there. In fact, this is the very reason that Tracy reached out to me to interview me for her interview was I wrote an article about the importance of that sanctuary to me
Mm-hmm.
in reconnecting with nature and especially the birds. But even today, when you and I go out for a walk, and even though I've not been allowed to create a bird sanctuary here at our
No,
new old home,
no.
because we've got plenty of
There's
critters.
plenty of birds. Yes, if you're not aware, yes, there are plenty
Yeah.
of critters. We have told many stories about them.
Yeah. But there was just something about that, about reconnecting with nature. And then, during the pandemic, setting out food for them, setting out water for them, taking care of, these little helpless birds. But it was a reconnection of myself or my humanity with a larger picture, a larger purpose, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really meant a lot to me. And I told Tracy when she interviewed me that helped feed my soul, that helped me mature and grow deeper in my faith because of that simple experience with nature.
Yeah, but do you remember when the ducks came and took over the pool? And then they wouldn't even let us in it because they thought it was then
I do
theirs?
remember but I didn't put out duck feed or did anything
It
like
didn't
that.
matter. You had created such a hospitable environment.
I did. I
You
forgot
mentioned they're
about the
helpless
ducks.
birds. They weren't helpless. They were just like, hey, yo, everybody, there's like
Free
steak over
food.
here. This is like, yes, the what is it? The craft foods at the,
Yeah,
in the movie screen. Like, come on over here. Yeah. So we did. We had ducks for a while that tried to take over the pool, and we
Yeah.
had to try several different things before we finally scared them off. Anyway.
But anywho, it was a great reminder that I was part of something larger than myself. And I think that is one of the positives that came out of COVID is the realization that we are part of a larger global community.
Yeah, and in talking to Scott and Tracy about the study results that they're finding, it was really interesting because I think we all kind of assume you hear, okay, people are leaving the church,
Right.
especially during COVID. And of course, during after George Floyd's murder and, the Black Lives Matter movement of that summer, we just assume everybody's kind of apathetic and
Sure.
leaving. And I think some of the results they're finding are super interesting about folks who have really found more connection with their congregations or have joined congregations, since 2020. And I think that it's just very interesting. So I'm really enjoying kind of digging into their website and learning a little bit more about these trends that really are surprising. And also kind of seeing what new and innovative methods churches were forced to embrace. What are we going to keep? What are we not going to keep? Are we going to,
Right.
go back into kind of familiar, not so good habits?
Yeah.
Or are we going to continue to innovate and see where society needs the church to be? So
Yeah, it was interesting to kind of explore some of those stories, and of course there are more stories on their website, and that's site's going to be on the show notes. But about how churches adapted, some adapted very quickly, but then what has happened after 5 years is that there has been an expansion of community,
mhm.
and we talk a little bit about it in the interview, but. I told you recently I was in Virginia at a local church preaching, and the pastor there told me about their online community and that they've got members, all across the country who join every Sunday night together for a Bible study.
Mhm.
And that just wouldn't have happened prior to the pandemic. It just,
Mhm.
wouldn't even thought of. But now their community has expanded and it's affected their church. It's affected their church right there in their town in Virginia. But has a global impact. So that's, the stories are kind of cool to hear.
Yeah, I really also enjoyed Scott and Tracy shared a couple of stories, anecdotal stories like that are just really inspiring to see how communities are, innovating and have continued to do that and to hold to some new and creative things.
Absolutely. So, Missy and I will be right back with Scott Thumma and Tracy Simmons as we talk about the project exploring the pandemic's impact on congregations. We'll be right back. You know, Missy, I really enjoy recording this podcast with you each and every week.
Do you?
Well, but this is not the only thing we do at Good Faith Media.
It's not. We have so many offerings for you. We have a plethora of podcasts, videos, news and opinion articles, Bible studies, books, and much, much more. Find us at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we got two very special guests with us. Scott Thumma serves as the Principal Investigator of the Exploring the Pandemic Impact on Congregations project. Thumma is Professor of Sociology of Religion at Hartford International University for Religion and Peace and the Director of the Hartford Institute for Religion Research. He is the co-chair of the Faith Communities Today project and on the steering committee of the US Religious Census, as well as researcher advisor for several other projects and organizations. Tracy Simmons serves as a writer and social media consultant on the project. Tracy is a scholarly assistant professor at the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University and writes for Religious News Services as well as the Spokesman Review. Scott, Tracy, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, Scott, let's begin with you. I think we can all kind of agree and acknowledge that there is not one area of life that COVID did not impact greatly. And I think for each of us, that may look a little bit different. We can kind of talk about some of that in a bit. But before we get into specifics about the study in particular, why did you feel it was important to study, in particular, congregational life during the pandemic and its effects?
Yeah, good question. Certainly, I've been studying congregations all my career, almost 35 years now, and that's what the Hartford Institute does. But I just happened to be on sabbatical at the beginning of the pandemic, and
Wow.
and it gave me a lot of time to think about how life was changing for me. And there was a whole flood of surveys that were happening right at the beginning of the pandemic by all sorts of people, like what's going on in churches. And my concern was not so much that immediate effect, but the long-term effects, and whether what we saw during the depth of the pandemic was actually going to continue, and if so, what were the long-term traumas in some sense that were going to be around. And so I proposed to the Lilly Endowment, our funder, that we sort of follow congregations for 5 years to see what that effect was. And it's been an amazing project. We have till the summer of 26 to continue doing research.
Oh, wow.
So we're still not finished, and it's been really an interesting ride for sure.
Cool.
So you're still actively researching and coming up with findings as we speak.
We are. We have a very large study that's going out. Actually, the large church part of it went out today, but most of it will happen this fall. And we're hoping to get maybe 10,000 congregations to respond.
Okay.
And then in the spring, we have another survey of pastors. And we're also going to try to survey people who have decided to leave congregations since the pandemic, to see, like, why did they give up, where did they go, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then by June we'll be finished and try to make sense of all of this data we've collected.
And put COVID to bed, right?
Right. Yeah. It's all done. All behind
I
us.
gave myself long COVID, it just won't go away.
Oh no. Well, Tracy, let's hear from you a minute. How did you get involved with this project, and tell us how social media plays into this?
Sure. I've known Scott for many, many years, and I actually used to live in the Hartford area as a religion reporter, and so I got to know him through that. And Scott had a really good idea to bring a journalist on to this program because researchers don't always know that there's a really cool story that's right in front of their eyes.
Right.
And so my role is really to kind of help them figure out what are some cool stories that people would be interested in reading about. And so that's my role, and I think it's really fun. We Social media has been interesting because we're obviously researching COVID, and so we've had to leave certain platforms, and we've had to figure out where to advertise and not advertise our work because there is still a lot of conflict around COVID,
Right.
right? And so right now we're focusing mostly sharing content on Facebook, not just our research, but also any story that has to do with COVID and religion.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, I've been saying for quite some time now that this was probably the most impactful moment, not only on us as a culture individually, but certainly upon the church at large. And I don't know at what point we're going to really discover the long-term ramifications that COVID had and the pandemic had on the church, but I know it had an immediate impact. And that's what I'm so excited to talk to you about today. So before we get into the study, as Missy mentioned a moment ago, I can remember the moment I realized this was going to be a big freaking deal. And you begin to hear, reports, especially on the West Coast, East Coast, of, isolated incidents where COVID was creeping up in individuals. But I was in the nation's capital in March, and I was attending an event there, and all of a sudden word broke that this Episcopal priest who had given the sacraments out during communion had contracted COVID. And the entire Capitol just shut down. Within 24 hours, the Smithsonian was shut down. The Capitol was shut down. The White House was shut down. And I called Missy and said, this is going to be a big deal. And so at what point did you realize this was going to be a global moment for the world?
My perspective is really focused mostly on congregations, right? I was sitting at home and having studied churches for so long, they never change. And if you ask them to change, they go, oh, "We don't do it here.
Sure.
We've done the same thing for 200 years. We're not going to change." And listening to reports, watching the data come in that said all these congregations were going online, starting, live streaming. I had been preaching that to my doctorate of ministry students forever to try to do that, and none of them would.
Right.
And then almost overnight, they were changing. And I figured that if these congregations were changing, something significant was happening, and sure enough, and they're not going back from it either, most of them.
Yeah.
So
it was fascinating, Scott, because like the first couple of months of the pandemic, one of the things that was unique about it is because, like you said, everybody started going online, and I could literally sit, in my living room and watch services beginning, on the East Coast, going all the way to the West Coast for 4 hours, just straight listening to incredible preaching and experiences along the way. So yeah, when all the churches went online, that was certainly an earmark. Tracy, how about you?
I teach full time. This is part of my academic work working with this project, but I remember planning a study abroad trip, and it got canceled all of a sudden. The faculty and students were told to, jump on Zoom and teach. And the campus was just a ghost town, like that. And that's when it really hit me that, wow,
Sure.
this is a long-term thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's turn our attention to the study itself. So, Scott, the study was designed to answer specific research questions. So, tell us what those questions were and how you arrived at those questions.
Well, the biggest emphasis was really not so much what changed during the pandemic, but to see what these patterns, how they played out. Like, for instance, the live streaming. Were congregations going to continue that? And then the more important questions is what kinds of changes in the dynamics between people, their interactions, their giving, their attendance, if they could go online and watch, was that going to diminish their in-person involvement? Or one of the things we're finding out is it opens up, as you said, more congregations to be visited virtually.
Right.
And so is that going to also compete with the in-person pastor? Are they going to now evaluate this person's preaching differently? And it's those kind of qualitative changes that we really wanted to try to measure over time.
Right.
And you know, that's something that we don't often think about. We see the immediate change, but we don't know what the implications of that are into the future. So that's a lot of what we're really after.
Yeah. And Tracy, I mean, you're a journalist as well. You heard a lot of stories, especially immediately impacting congregational life. So what were some of the more compelling stories that you heard of, within this study, or at least, the first year of the pandemic, how churches and individuals were impacted, regarding their faith and practice of faith?
Yeah, we looked at how churches got real creative, right? Because all of a sudden they couldn't do their ministry in their brick and mortar buildings. And so I remember doing, one story about a church in New Jersey that started a sandwich ministry because they needed to feed their community, but they had to pivot how they were doing that. And so it was really neat because the volunteers would get together and put the sandwiches together, but people from the community and other churches and even other religions would stock a fridge that was outside their church with tomatoes and ketchup and whatever.
Right.
And then they would drive it out and deliver it to people instead of people coming to the church. That was really a neat story, and it's progressed. It's still going. It's called Bread Breakers. And now they have other like convenience stores donating food and so forth. So that's continued. We looked at, as you can imagine, students didn't really want to be on Zoom, right? After, because they were going to school on Zoom, so they weren't going to go to Sunday school on Zoom. But we found a church, a Unitarian church, that found a really creative way to get kids involved by creating a Dungeons and Dragons like ministry, youth ministry. So that was a really fun story, and then another one that I really liked, and this was out of North Carolina, a church bought a food truck to feed the school kids who couldn't come to campus anymore.
Wow.
And that's also still going. So
Super
lots of
cool.
really cool creative things happening.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, Scott, what are some other of the most lasting impacts that you're seeing coming out of, kind of the height of pandemic? Some trends that we're going to see that you think are going to continue?
Well, so certainly the ability to attend worship online and to be involved that way, I think is a pretty profound shift in most congregations. But unfortunately, in some ways, some of the trends that we're seeing that often get credited to the pandemic were in fact already in place, and the pandemic itself just kind of amplified some of those trends, or maybe even kind of pulled back the curtain. People weren't willing to recognize the fact that maybe congregations were getting older, they were in decline, there were fewer people there, but having that break from actual attendance and then coming back in, it's almost like going back to your hometown and realizing, oh, this isn't as big a hometown as it was when I left at age 17 or something, And I think that awakening, that awareness of people getting back together, really caused them to take a little more realistic look at some of the dynamics. And so it's almost like we all suffered this collective trauma, but when we came back into community and came back into these congregations, we saw it in a different light. And now we have to deal with not only that trauma that we suffered, but also the reality, there are problems here. We were just kind of forgetting about those. And I think that's a healthy thing. It's a challenging situation to be put in, but I'm all for us being optimistic, but also realists at the same time. And I think the pandemic really helped people say, okay, yeah, we got to do something. We have to make some changes. Unfortunately, what we saw at the beginning part of the pandemic in the first couple of years a lot of congregations responded to questions, we're willing to change to meet new challenges. And we saw a record high number of people say, yes, we absolutely agree with that. As the pandemic has gone on and time since that rubber band has contracted again.
Right.
And so now fewer and fewer congregations seem like they're really willing to make the changes that need to continue to be made. And that has been a little somewhat depressing for me as one who cares about congregational life, you know.
Sure.
But I think the online opportunities hold a lot of potential, and the congregations that have been willing to continue to make those changes and to adapt to a new reality are really poised, I think, to grow. And we see that about a third of congregations are growing. Some are stagnant, and then some are in pretty significant decline. And who it was before the pandemic that was growing isn't quite the same people who are growing now. So there has been some real shifts take place.
Interesting. So are you looking at all specifically at clergy and kind of examining what has happened in their lives and profession?
I mean, it really was the perfect storm back in 2020. I mean, just because you had heightened partisanship, happening across the country, vaccines, masking got politicized even within the local congregations, shutting congregations down. And then, of course, then you had the George Floyd murder in Minnesota and all that happened there. So, yeah, I mean, clergy were dealing with a lot of stuff, Scott.
Oh, yes. I mean, and Tracy can talk about this too. When we interview clergy, you almost have to take a part of the interview time just to do a little counseling,
right?
Before you actually get it. I mean, because it has been a significant challenge for them. We did a survey in the fall of 23 that really focused specifically on clergy well-being and mental health and such. Because what we had been noticing, we'd ask a question, had they thought about leaving the ministry? Had they thought about leaving their church? And every time we asked that, the picture got grimmer, right? Wow. It was like a larger percentage had thought about this, at least, fleeting thoughts. And so we did this survey, and it turned out that actually most clergy scored in the pretty decent health and somewhat higher wellness than the general population. But when you started to ask about their lives and their mental health in relation to the congregational context, it was very clear that much of their discomfort and discontentment was not with the ministry itself, but with the reality that was happening inside their congregation, inside their church. Yeah. And if the church members and the dynamic was healthy, they felt much better about themselves and about the vocation. But if things were challenged, and as you said, Mitch, there were a lot of things to challenge that whole congregational dynamic. That really impacted a lot of the pastors significantly, and so we saw the level of loneliness much higher than the national average on some of these same measures. So I think, and that hasn't stopped yet. So the idea that congregations were flexible and now they've become less flexible, the clergy know that they still need to make change. They still need to adapt, but they're still facing this challenge of trying to pull people to a new place, and those people don't want to go there. And the pastors feel that every day, I think, when they go to work.
Yeah, it was kind of depressing, but we named that study after a quote from a pastor, and that was, "I'm exhausted all the time." And I don't know if that's changed all that much.
Yeah.
Did you, in the study, did you pick up on any significant evidence that suggested how important it is for clergy to have built-in networks, built-in communities of colleagues to be able to talk through the things that they are dealing with congregationally outside of the congregation? Because ministry, and I was a pastor for over 2 decades, it can be very isolating. So, did you pick up on that? Have you heard? Has there been a strengthening of clergy networks due to the pandemic?
What we were hoping when we did the health and wellness survey is we ask a whole bunch of things. Do you do physical education? I mean, physical activities. Do you have connections? Do you have a mentor or a counselor that you work with, or do you have clergy groups? And honestly, almost none of those things had a significant impact on the person's wellness score.
Wow. Yeah.
As at least not as
That's
much
interesting.
as several things. One, were they spending a lot of time building up their own sense of spiritual health, right? So did they set aside time to pray, to read the Bible, to get away from, the hubbub? I mean, in some ways, like Jesus going off into the hills and, get away from the
Scott bringing
disciples
Jesus
kind
into
of
the
thing.
conversation. Thanks.
Hey, what can I say? I'm an old time Baptist. But the other thing that, as I said before, a lot of it had to do with the relationship between that clergy person and their congregational members, and if that was a positive thing. But the other thing we discovered, I mean, obviously, clergy peer groups and counseling and all that sort of stuff is not a negative,
Right.
right? But it also wasn't a significant positive.
Yeah.
But the other piece of this that we realized was the part-time ministers scored better than the full-time ministers. And the full-time ministers that also had other jobs, like if they also did a chaplaincy, or they also taught at a university or something, those folks looked better than just the full-time people who had their whole lives tied up in one single congregation. That if they could divide their loyalties or disconnect from the life of that one congregation, they seemed mentally and physically even healthier than if they were just so tied up in that one church that if the church wasn't doing well, they weren't doing well.
Right.
It gave them some distance that created some health.
That's fascinating.
That's how I feel about teaching, Scott. The other thing we found that was interesting, remember there's like an economic factor to all this too.
Sure.
And clergy actually reported feeling more financially stable or secure than the general public. So I thought that was really interesting because we know they don't make a ton.
Right. That's very interesting.
I think that was interesting for us. I mean, just anecdotally, because again, this is our kind of community. We talk to a lot of folks who are in ministry, and that's one thing that we heard more often than not is that the giving was strengthened during COVID, which was just an interesting thing to hear.
Yeah, very interesting.
And that has continued. This last survey we did, giving was higher than any time we've reported it in the last 25 years. And I think part of that is because many of these congregations also went to online giving. And a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, I calculated those congregations that had online giving didn't emphasize it, they just had it, gave per capita about $100 more per person. And if they emphasized it, it was over $300 per capita more. And so if you think many of these congregations went online and started to emphasize online giving, just that in and of itself would have increased the giving. So that's a pretty profound change, I think, too, within congregational life.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
interesting.
So let's move to long-term trends, long-term results from the pandemic. And we've already talked about a few of those. You mentioned a moment ago, obviously, churches were forced to go online, even if they went screaming and
Yeah.
kicking. It's fascinating to me as I travel across the country and preach at different churches in different states, almost to the T. When the pastor talks to me before the service begins, they tell me how many they have in person and how many are expected online. I mean, I get the speech every time before service starts, and it's just become a part of congregational life. And also, they're telling me their congregation has expanded, even if they were a regional church within a community. Now they become almost a national church because some of them are having Sunday school classes online with different participants from across the country and sometimes around the world. Do you see that as a long-term change within the congregation of how that's going to affect congregational life?
I think there's no doubt. We hear that very same thing over and over again. Not only that, it allows snowbirds, right, to be in Florida, but also still appreciating their
Right.
Minnesota,
Yeah.
home church, or people who have gone off to college, right? They still can remain connected to that ground. Um, we've we've also seen and specifically asked the question in this last survey we did to 24,000 church attenders. Do you have another church home that you consider? And it turned out like 7 or 8%
Oh, wow.
said, yeah, I'm a member basically of two specific churches. But then we also asked, well, do you also attend other congregations regularly? And nearly 50% of these kind of core regular members actually attend multiple congregations on any given week or month. And it turns out that some of that is virtual, but a lot of that is also in person. And as we tried to understand whether that was a change or not because of the pandemic, it looks like one other survey in 2009 showed a similar characteristic. So that in fact, this is one of those pulling back the curtain. People had always kind of gone to a Bible study somewhere else or occasionally drop in to hear another pastor, but they didn't recognize that as cheating on their spouse, right? Ever since this report has come out, we keep getting people come up and confess to us, oh yes, yeah, now I cheat on my church, you know, but it's not really, I think, an unhealthy thing. In fact, we looked at the people who do it and the people that don't do it. And the people that actually go out and participate in other congregations along with their primary one are stronger participants. I get the sense that their feeling is everything I need spiritually, I can't get from this one congregation. I need to experience congregational life and spiritual life from a bunch of different perspectives. And that seems to reinforce that's a positive reality. And people were afraid to talk about that.
Yeah.
Like they thought they were deviant because they did it. But in fact, it turns out it's a very positive reality.
And Tracy, you had something surprising kind of during the study as well. And this is how you and I actually got connected, because I wrote an article during the pandemic about how my faith was actually being strengthened during the pandemic, when, kind of logic would conclude, you may want to, if you're disengaging or pulling back, that, you may not be as, spiritually minded. But you found that in certain conversations, you were finding that people's faith was being strengthened during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think something like 55%, so more than half of church attenders reported having a stronger faith since the pandemic. That wasn't immediate,
Right.
but we're seeing it now. So yeah, that's been pretty interesting. And I think another half said that the congregation is stronger and more vital, and so it's more like meaningful to them.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
So before we wrap this up, Tracy, as you're a journalist, so if you could share one story from the study, from the findings that you would love for listeners to know about, what would that be?
I was just actually, when we were talking about online worship, thinking about this pastor in Ohio, and it was his very first, like he had just been hired and then the church got shut down because of COVID. And so he was like, okay, I have to figure out how to use a video camera, and he has been doing it ever since. And one thing that's interesting, so he does his sermons not live on YouTube, but he records them, edits them after the service, and then puts them up for a live comment section.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to get a woman to start going to his church from the East Coast, an older woman, simply because he was thinking about accessibility. So he put the text up on the screen for the hymns, for the sermon, and that's what this woman needed. She couldn't physically get to church anymore,
Right.
but she could all of a sudden like participate in a way that she couldn't before. So I think those stories are really cool. And I think about that church sometime, that young pastor just starting out and how he's just thrown into it and how he's adapted.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Well, Scott Thumma and Tracy Simmons, thank you so much for joining us this week on Good Faith Weekly. Where can people find out more about the study, Scott?
Yes, we have a website, covidreligionresearch.org. And all of our surveys and findings are written up in some nice summary pieces, and will continue to be. So people should go there, take a look. We have so much data yet to analyze, and we try to make it accessible for clergy, for church attenders. Thanks, Tracy.
We also have clergy commentary on the site, which I think is really interesting. So it's a way for clergy to offer their reflections on our research.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So absolutely. So we'll put that site in the show notes for our listeners who want to find out more about the study. But I was really excited to talk to both of you because this is the first study I had heard of, looking at the pandemic from a congregational life perspective. And I really appreciate everything that I gleaned from our conversation today, as well as going to the site and reading those testimonies and looking at the data that you collected, and looking forward to more data coming out very soon. Well, Scott and Tracy, before we let you go, though, we've got one last question, and Missy has the honor of asking it.
So as you both know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell? And Scott, we'll let you go first.
I would have said come to our website and continue, but I can't not talk about the fact that I'm about to retire,
Mm-hmm.
and so I know I'm signing for a New Hampshire farm at the end of the month
beautiful.
To raise chickens and goats, and so that's my more to tell.
Oh, well, congratulations! That's exciting to hear. And Tracy,
I'm not going to retire anytime soon, so I would just say, I love religion reporting and journalism, and I run my own online publication out of the Inland Northwest called Faves News. That's FAVS. And it's a really great place to come read about other religion issues happening in the Pacific Northwest.
Awesome.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us this week. Scott and Tracy, you're welcome back anytime. And for our listeners who want more information, make certain you go check out their site, Exploring the Pandemic Impact on Congregations. We'll have the website in the show notes that you can link to. Thank you both for joining us this week.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And to our listeners, Missy and I will be back next week. Until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.